barely able to keep up with his pace. So for Prabhupada to stay anywhere very long was unusual because he had so many responsibilities to give birth to and then to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world by establishing so many temples and so many farm communities eventually, restaurants, meeting with so many important people, and representing the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition in the purest form. So for him to stay anywhere very long was unusual. Usually his stays were, unless it was going back to India, it was a week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. But in the first visit to New Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada stayed for 30 days. And this was in the original New Vrindavan farm, which was, you see a picture of here in a while. Can you bring it? Okay. And at that time, he, in those 30 days, he gave very, both broad and specific instructions about what it meant to be a devotee of Krishna living in a rural setting. Let me ask this question of everybody in the room here. How many of you can trace your roots back directly to a village? And in that village, as I've been hearing from some of the devotees here in Seattle, the nature of life was, although somewhat difficult, a lot of physical endeavor just to get water, to grow the food, to do so many things. But there was something about it that was magical, and that was that there was a sense of community. In the urban settings, sometimes that is lost. So one of the instructions that Prabhupada gave to his early followers in New Vrindavan was to develop a community in which the worship of Lord Krishna is the first and foremost thing, the care of the cows, the protection of the bulls and the cows, the growing of our own food, and the development of a loving mood amongst the residents of New Vrindavan that was approaching or helping us understand about what we hear through Shastra about the original Vrindavan. When Krishna was physically present on the planet. Of course, Krishna is always here. But when Krishna was in Vrindavan, in Gokul Vrindavan, on this planet, the loving mood of the gopis and the gopas and even the trees and the creepers, everything was focused around rendering service and developing love for Krishna. So that was the essence of his instruction, that he charged us with the responsibility to take up a lifestyle in which we were seeing Krishna everywhere, seeing Krishna in his energy, using everything at our disposal in Krishna's service, and somewhat similar to those of you who know from living in village, the lifestyle of interacting with nature and not only interacting just to maintain the body, but to also maintain a sense of spiritual identity at the same time. So that's a big challenge, actually. It's especially a big challenge when you come to a large city like Seattle. So how fortunate are we that even in a place that's governed by very passionate economic activity, like Seattle or any big city for that matter, that you have shelter, that you're in this. You could be so many places tonight. Huh? You could be at home doing something, or you could be enjoying some entertainment somewhere. But that you've chosen to come to a setting and sit before the glorious forms of the deities and expose yourself to hearing about the glories of devotional service, of bhakti yoga, is such a wonderful thing. And we should all be so grateful that we have that opportunity. So, as you can see on the screen here, this is a presentation that is designed to explain in West Virginia how I've developed this farming operation, but not just as a farming operation, not just growing food, right? So many people are growing food. But how do you use that food to bring about a raising of consciousness, not only in New Vrindavan, but also outside of New Vrindavan? So that's why this is entitled Toolbox for Building a Green Congregation. And before we actually start clicking through some of these slides, I wanted to point one thing out to you that's really important to understand. You know, we hear through the Shabda Brahman, through the pure sound vibration coming from a pure source, from a perfect source, from Shastra, from Guru, and from Sadhu, that this material world is a temporary place. We also hear that we are in the age of Kali, which is inevitably causing the deterioration of everything. Material nature itself is deteriorating. And the principles of cleanliness and mercy and truthfulness and austerity are eroding very quickly in Kali Yuga. We can see it right before our eyes. Just like for those of you born in India, it must be somewhat shocking to go back and see that in just 10 or 15 years, how things have changed. I'm always hearing this from my Indian devotee friends, that the things the traditions and the values, core values that they grew up with and saw evident in everyday life in India are changing. So that's the nature of Kali. Everything is deteriorating. So we hear this. We hear that it is the age of Kali. We hear that everything is temporary in this material world. We know that this body is destined for old age, disease, and death. So the question may easily arise, why should we concern ourselves with where our food is coming from? What does it matter? Given all the temporal nature of everything, why is it important? What is the value of this? So that's what we're going to explore tonight. That's what we want to talk about, is the connection between using farming, gardening, environmental issues, issues of sustainable development in Krishna's service. How to do that. So what I want to do is walk you through some of my experiences with that. Not that they're unique to me, but these are, as a devotee of Krishna or someone aspiring to be a devotee of Krishna, these are some of the experiences that I've had with that. Okay? All right, so let's begin with our first slide, please. Oh, there it is. So this is the reason this slide is here. This is a newsletter from a very large organization in the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is has big cities, but it's also a very large state that's very rural. And there's a lot of sustainable agriculture there. In fact, that's the largest Amish community. Have you heard of the Amish before? These are these people who intentionally avoid technology. They do things the way they've done for the last 150 years in America because they worry about how technology might impact community. So they make a deliberate decision to avoid certain types of technology if it will negatively impact sense of community. Of course, Mohandas Gandhi, also kind of spread that idea, that he said that the technology should only be to the extent that it's the extension of the hand, like a wheelbarrow or a shovel, something like that. Nothing more complex than that. He warned against that, actually. So in this state of Pennsylvania, there's a lot of sustainable agriculture. There's a whole movement, as there is worldwide. There's a whole movement going on to get back to simpler ways of doing things that are not so taxing on the environment and not so taxing on our consciousness as well. Unfortunately, a lot of this movement going in the direction of local food, sustainable agriculture like that is driven by economic development, and unfortunately, it's driven by a desire to create food, a source of food, animal food, that's still slaughtered, but it's done organically. This is kind of the idea that they have. So they have names for this: free-range chickens, pasture-fed beef, raised humanely, right? They have all these names for the act of caring for animals, but then ultimately taking their life. So when you go to these conferences, this is a very large conference in Pennsylvania. 2,000 or 3,000 people attend this every year. I attended it maybe 5 or 6 years in a row. And as a devotee of Krishna, I was becoming a little disturbed because I saw most of the workshops being presented here were drifting in that direction, the themes of them. One man presented a workshop entitled, "How I Raise 80% of My Food on 5 Acres of Land." And he does it. Well, yeah, he does it, but he does it by raising pigs and geese and like that, and he slaughters them. He also has an orchard. He also is a good gardener. But for him, slaughtering animals is absolutely part of life. And of course, for someone understanding the higher value, who is reflective of the higher values of life, that's unacceptable. In other words, our principle is this, as taught by Srila Prabhupada. The material world is a place where there's always violence. It cannot be avoided, but it can be minimized. So the spiritual principle is, how do you conduct life and interact with the energy around us, but do so with the minimum amount of violence? The cruel fact of life is this, that every time you walk, you're killing. Every time you breathe in and out, you're killing. Every time you sweep a floor, every time you grind spices, and every time you drink water, you're killing. So the recognition that death is going on and that killing is taking place, even by the ordinary things that we do every day, is a sobering reminder of that this place we live in, formerly known as Bharatvarsha, is also known to the demigods as Martyaloka, place of death. Huh? So, one who is in the mode of goodness, sattva gun, who is understanding the goal of life, that this is not my real home. How do I use the opportunity, however, to get out of here in the proper way, knows that unnecessary killing is completely out of the question. What to speak of killing a cow? Actually, according to Shastra, this is found in Srimad Bhagavatam, it says that goat and deer, 6th canto Bhagavatam, are food for human beings. Now, that does not mean first-class human being. It means that there's always a class who will do this. They'll always eat meat. There's always going to be, has been, and always will be a class of meat eaters in this world. So for those people, okay, you can take this less important animal, but never, never the cow. So imagine, go ahead to the next slide, please. So imagine that you're at a conference, you're a devotee of Krishna. I'm there, I'm dressed like a farmer, and they're talking about, I have my choice between a workshop about killing pigs and a workshop about killing cows or chickens or how to make money doing these things. So very painful. These are the kind of, this slide is depicting the kind of advertising, the information tables that are set up. Go ahead, next slide, please. Another one, this is the brochure that they give out. They're talking about, providing a livable tomorrow. Well, for who? Obviously not for that turkey. The future of that turkey we know, right? Actually, in New Vrindavan, in America they have this festival or this celebration every year called Thanksgiving, right? And the tradition is that they kill millions of turkeys and then they eat them for this celebration. Well, in New Vrindavan, what we used to do to catch the attention of the local news media is we had our own turkeys that we protected, and we would dress them up with a hat, a big bow tie, and a tuxedo. And we would invite the news media. And the news media would come with their big cameras, and they would focus in, they would pan in on the oven, because that's how they make these turkeys. They roast them, right? And they would open slowly the door to the oven, and they'd look in, and the news anchor would say, "There's no turkey in there." And then they would pan over to the table, and at the head of the table, as the guest of honor, was our turkey, Jiva. His name was Jiva. So anyway, it made a really nice opportunity to spread the concept that you don't have to take life unnecessarily. Anyway, at these conferences, that's what goes on. So very painful. So what I did, next slide, please. What I did is I approached the leadership of this conference. Again, remember, this is 2,000 or 3,000 people who come to this, big keynote speakers, and days, 3 consecutive days of workshops going on. And I approached the leadership, and I said, you know what? There's another approach to farming, and it is based on a different worldview. And in that worldview, the animals are recognized and appreciated not only for their functional value as draft animals or as giving milk, but they're also recognized for their intrinsic value, that they have a right to live. And by the way, that farming system is the oldest farming system in the world. In terms of antiquity and longevity, the Vedic approach, as expressed in India even today, is the oldest farming system in the world. So I would like to do a workshop on that. I would like to present that idea. And they said, well, okay, sounds doable, but write us an abstract, a summary, what you want to say. So I wrote this essay entitled, "Bad Karma is Not Sustainable," and subtitled, "Farming as If Your Next Life Depends on It." That really caught their attention. So they got back to me, and they said, no, you cannot do this because it's too controversial. And my response was, good. I want it to be controversial, not to upset people, but because your workshops, the drift of your workshops, are pulling people in a direction of animal slaughter. And the fact is, in America, as I sit here now, 1 out of every 200 teenagers is a vegetarian. So the vegan and vegetarian lifestyle is something that's growing by millions of people every year in this country. And then I made a point to them that they could not refute. This was the hook that really caught their attention. I said, if a model of farming is actually sustainable, it not only protects the land from degradation. Land degradation means you're mining the soil. You're just taking everything out of the soil. And you're adding poison to it. You're using nitrogen-based chemical fertilizers, ammonium hydrate, ammonium nitrate, like that. And you're also, if it's sustainable, you're also protecting the water. The water table is being protected from the leaching of chemicals, and the water the watershed is being protected as well. But beyond protecting the land, beyond protecting the water, for a model of farming to be actually sustainable, it has to protect the farmer, he or she, from karmic peril, from karmic vulnerability for what they're doing. In other words, if you're taking life for income, there's a karmic component to that. Now, keep in mind, the people that I'm addressing with this argument are mostly progressive people. They're awakened somewhat to Eastern philosophy, and for them, the word karma is kind of something they use quite a bit and they've heard a lot about. But they don't know anything about it. It's just like if I ask, does everybody in this room believe in gravity? Yes, everybody believes in gravity. It's why you're not floating right now, actually. But if I ask you, how does gravity work? What is this thing? Nobody really can you explain it to me through the law of physics? Can you explain it to me through mathematics? Or who's going to do that? But we know it's there. So they have this kind of very loose idea. Sure.
Special birthday, so we don't want to interrupt the birthday party. So do you have a cake? One for Srimati Radharani, of course, and also for Srimati Anika. You go get it, okay.
Okay, we're waiting on Annika, so my point is this. If you're inviting people to engage in what appears to be a way of making living in which you're unnecessarily taking life, there's a karmic component. And the group of people I was addressing, the leadership of this big sustainable agriculture movement, the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, these are all people who believe in karma. They know it exists, but they don't know anything about it. So I pointed out to them that you don't really have, I didn't say this directly to them, but I inferred it. I said, you don't really have a right presenting this as an alternative lifestyle if you're putting people in danger like that. And there's an alternative. Fast-moving action with trying to convince a bunch of apparently progressive people that karma exists. They kind of believe in it, but by the grace of Srila Prabhupada, we have an understanding of how these laws of nature work that's definitive. So I pointed out to them, I said, by the way, the patriarchs, the secular gurus, if you will, of the sustainable agricultural movement in the West, namely Sir Alfred Howard. Does anybody know Sir Alfred Howard's teachings here? Sir Alfred Howard spent most of his life in India. He was, the Royal Botanical, the official government agency in India to make a transition from what Indian farmers had been doing for kalpas into Western farming model. That's why he was sent there. And he was there like 30, 40 years. But he was an honest man. And he noticed that the villagers in India understood more about soil technology, so to speak, fertility, the care of the animals, and they were happy, they were healthy. So when he would go back to London to give his report every year, he was mandatory to address his colleagues. He basically said to them, they should be teaching us. Why are we over there trying to ruin their They're agriculture. They should be teaching us. So they fired him. And then he wrote a book called The New Agricultural Testament. This is like in 1940 or so. That book, The New Agricultural Testament, became the Bible, so to speak, the operating manual for the American organic movement after World War II. So he was very well known. The other one is another secular guru of the organic farming movement in the West is Rudolf Steiner, biodynamic. Biodynamic is kind of he was a Christian mystic who studied the Vedas, and he had great respect for the Vedas. And he teaches how to make these very potent organic compounds, fertilizers, by taking gober and stuffing a cow's horn and then burying it on under certain astrological influences and making this extremely potent compost that you then spread on your fields. Anyway, like that. And then, of course, in America, there were the American transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, all these people, right? So I pointed out to them, I said, even the gurus, even your gurus, understand that this system is the oldest. This system has real longevity. And that's why before they wrote their treatises, they drew from India and the Vedas before making their comments and writing their treatises on agriculture. So how can you be inviting all these young people here to enter into a career in which they're killing chickens, cows, and pigs organically and so-called humanely without at least considering this? So they changed their mind. They said, okay, you can do the workshop. Now, this is a very big conference, and if you can get 30 people at your workshop at this conference, you're doing good, because there's a lot of have you ever been to these kind of conferences? They give you the list of workshop options, and there's 10 good workshops. You want to go to all of them, but you can't, because you can only be one place at one time unless you're a mystic yogi who can expand himself. So they gave me the go-ahead, yes, you can do it. And I'm sitting in this room on a Saturday at 10:30 in the morning. 100 people walk in. And I had can you switch to the next one, please? I had the diorama known as Axeman as part of my presentation. This is not just this illustration, but it's the actual three-dimensional diorama. And I looked over this crowd and I recognized some of the people were beef farmers and some of them were chicken farmers who I had talked with previously. And they were all staring at me. And I thought, this might not have been a real good idea. And I was a little worried, actually. And then I thought about a wonderful pastime of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was directly Krishna himself. And when he was traveling throughout India, spreading the holy name as a young boy, 16-year-old boy, he went to Varanasi. And in Varanasi, at that time, of course, Varanasi or Benares was the seat of learning in India. And there was a very big, famous sannyasi there named Prakasananda Saraswati, who was the head of all the Mayavad sannyasis. Mayavad, of course, meaning they don't recognize Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They just think, oh, he's another one of the devas, And the ultimate goal is we're all Brahman, which is true, but there is a Param Brahma as well. Anyway, so because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had taken sannyas in a Mayavad sampradaya, his godbrothers, his sannyasi godbrothers, so to speak, invited him to lunch. And when he came to the mandir, he entered the mandir and he sat down like in this temple where you take your boots off, where you take your shoes off. And he was sitting like this. And of course, he's He's Radha and Krishna combined. He's got a golden hue. He's so beautiful and attractive. And so the other sannyasis saw him sitting like this, and they said, why is he sitting here? And Prakasananda Saraswati himself, the leader, went to the boot room and took him by the hand and led him into the assembly of sannyasis in the temple. And then they questioned him, why are you doing like this? And he said, I'm not a very advanced sannyasi. And they said, well, beyond that, why are you sentimentally engaging in this chanting Hare Krishna with children and women and people on the ordinary people who are not brahmanas, who are not... Sannyasis don't do this. Sannyasis study. They are recluse. They just study Shastra and they meditate on Brahman. Why are you doing like this? So he answered them. He said, well, my guru, again, he said I was not very advanced. I couldn't understand all these things. So he just gave me this mantra, this Hare Krishna mantra, and told me to chant it. And I have to admit, when I chant it, I am in ecstasy. And he said, beyond that, may I, with your permission, may I explain to you the fault in Shankaracharya's presentation that Brahman is supreme? The supreme absolute highest realization is Brahman, not Bhagavan. May I explain that, why there's a fault in his understanding? So, of course, for them, this is blasphemy to hear that Shankaracharya would be questioned. But he was so humble, and he was so beautiful, and his approach so tactful, that they said, yes, you may explain this to us. So he did, and he converted them all. And then sometime shortly after that, they were all dancing in the streets in Barnaris chanting, Haribol. So I remember that pastime. By the grace of Srila Prabhupada, I recalled that. And I went to the microphone in front of all these free-range chicken, pasture-fed beef people, 100 of them. And I said, you know, I've come here to speak to you, and it says that I'm a devotee of Krishna, and that I'm a strict vegetarian, that we protect cows, and I live in a Hare Krishna community. And you're probably thinking that I'm here to chastise you or moralize to you or judge you. But I'm not. That's not my purpose. I'm only here to share with you a secret of sustainability by which India is the oldest continuously existing civilization on earth with the oldest continuously existing farming system on the planet. And it's not only can I show you why that's a better system of farming, but I can also explain to you why it's important to your personal destiny. So now I had them curious. And I said, so with your permission, may I explain to you how the world works? If you would give me just 10 minutes to explain a little cosmology, how the world really works, then we'll go into the farming part of it. So they granted me permission. In other words, they were so happy that I was not going to preach to them that they granted me permission to preach to them, so to speak. So I started out by saying, do animals have souls? And there was difference of opinion. Some of the students, or some of the adults and some of the students who were attending said yes. Others said no. So we began dialoguing. Like, why do you say yes? Why do you say no? We're going back and forth like this. So probably for the first time in their life, they were actually discussing something that had some relevance to their destiny, not just the usual mundane kata. And then we went into karma. What is karma? How is it that if I attack somebody unnecessarily and I commit violence to them, I'm subject to laws. The police come, there's a trial, I'm penalized, I'm imprisoned, I have a horrible reputation now, right? All these things are karma. And how is it that you think that that's only true for human to human relations and not human to animal? Where do you get that idea? Anyway, we had a wonderful discussion. And I presented to them an angle by the grace of Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas and all the the wonderful legacy that is Vedic and that is India. Sustainability in a way that they had never heard it before. And at the end of the talk, after an hour and 20 minutes, they came to me and said, many people came to the podium and said, thank you so much. I so much appreciated it. So that's the gift that we have to offer, knowledge. And it's not just become sustainable for the sake of the body. Because the fact is, this body is not sustainable. You can try your best to be healthy, but ultimately, what can you do? The body is under the laws of nature. It's subject to the time factor. It will get old. It will become diseased. It will die. But what we can do is we can teach people to be sustainable for the right spiritual reasons. That's very different than just, I want to be healthy. I want the environment to be nice. Those are good. There's some nobility there, but it's not the ultimate form of sustainability because it's not necessarily connected to Krishna. So, next slide, please. So anyway, this was for me, it was a great growing experience because I really saw how Prabhupada said to us many times, he said, we should be the brahmanas. We should be guiding society with this knowledge. And even though we don't have perfect farming models at this point, we have many farms around the world. Some of them are doing quite well. Others are just kind of beginning, like here in Seattle, we're just beginning a farm. We do have the knowledge, even though we might not have an exact perfect model. These next series of slides, this is how I personally entered into this world of local foods. The very first, have all of you ever heard of Hare Krishna Food for Life program? This is this program where we feed poor people, basically, and the needy. The very first one of those programs was in Wheeling, West Virginia, actually, New Vrindavan. And it started out with 8 people. We went to 80 people. Next slide, please. And it got wonderful reviews. Another program that we did to share our concern was these cooking classes. This is Radhanath Swami, actually, and he and I traveled for many years together throughout Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, like that, teaching people a class called Indian Vegetarian Cooking. It was a 10-week course. In some colleges, they actually got credit for it. They got credit hours for it. But most importantly, they got association. They got prasadam. That was wonderful. Go ahead, next slide. Then I had the opportunity to develop a similar program in the city of Cleveland, Ohio. This is the first ever federal government-funded Meals on Wheels program that was all vegetarian in the city of Cleveland. A very, very bad neighborhood, very poor neighborhoods. The city of Cleveland loved us for this. They were so happy. Next slide. And this is the nature of the program. We purchased and fixed these old mail trucks, postal mail trucks, and out of the back of them, right on the streets, we would feed predominantly children and old people. These inner cities, especially in the Rust Belt, Cleveland, Detroit, all these places that are industrial dead zones now, they're food deserts. There's nowhere to eat. There's nowhere to find real food. It's just junk food, and it's expensive. And people are dying there of diabetes and obesity and things like this. So we were directly addressing this with prasadam distribution. Next slide. In fact, in the wintertime, because these places are icy cold, 0-degree weather, snow and ice, we would go into the the project buildings, these 10-story buildings, and we had like a paper boy. We had a delivery route to take prasadam to people. Next. And it had fantastic coverage all over the country. This is USA Today covering this first ever vegetarian Meals on Wheels. Next. Okay, now we're going to transit back to New Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada came to New Vrindavan, as I said, 4 times, 69, 72, 74, and 76. This is his visit in 1969. He stayed for 30 days. And next slide. He gave us a vision for how he wanted these communities to develop around the principles of plain living, high thinking, care of the deities, and the making the connection for people how plain living or simple living leads to higher thinking. Well, how does that work? Now, those of you here who raised your hand and said that you had lived in a village, today actually I had the great opportunity to speak at length with Madhava Chandra and Nampriya about their experiences as growing up in a village. They were telling me they lived in the villages they grew up in. They didn't even have electricity until they were like teenagers. And as I began pumping them with questions, well, what was it like? And how did you get your grains? And what did the bullocks do? And what was give me a snapshot of the daily routine of everybody in that village. What did they do? They became more and more enlivened, describing how village life was like. So Prabhupada gave us a little vignette, a little window on this in New Vrindavan, 1969. I wasn't there. I didn't come until 74. But that was the concept that he infused into our consciousness. We want this New Vrindavan to be a place where Krishna, where the inhabitants live simply. They're not harassed by the usual problems we find in cities, and they're just so happy to be serving Krishna, and they've got knowledge and power over their own lives. They're growing their own food. They're taking care of the cows, like in a village. Next. Of course, Prabhupada's other instruction for New Vrindavan was a place of pilgrimage. Just like in India, the original Vrindavan in India, Gokul Vrindavan, is such a wonderful place of pilgrimage. So he wanted that here, and New Vrindavan has developed that nicely over the years. This is one of my gardens. This is called the Teaching Garden. All those people you see in that garden originally came from Guyana. Well, I take it back. Originally, they came from India, and then they were enslaved as indentured servants and taken to Guyana by the British. So now they live in New York City. So these 75 people came into this garden unannounced. And their leader had a megaphone, bullhorn. And he came up to me and he said, "Here, say something." So I took the bullhorn and I said, "Okay, you are all from Guyana originally?" And, "Yes," very proud. And in Guyana, you had a land, you had cows, you had wonderful fresh vegetables, clean water, good neighbors, not much money, but you were happy. And they said, "Yes." I said, "Now you live in Queens and you have no cows, no land. You're afraid of your neighbors. Vegetables are expensive. The water is contaminated. You have lots of money, but you're miserable." And they said, "Yes." And I just handed the microphone back and said, "Here, I made my point." Next slide, please. So the fact is, that's not just true of people from Guyana. That's true of almost everybody in the whole world. My own grandparents came from Hungary. They were very, horribly exploited when they landed in America in the 1920s. They made their way to Detroit, where you could get a job in an auto factory for $5 a day. They scrimped, they saved. They bought a little farm finally, way, way up in northern Michigan. They were poor. I lived with them at that time. I was raised on that farm. And then suddenly they built the interstate transportation system. Like here you have, what is it, 405? I-90? Okay. Did you know that this interstate transportation system is the world's biggest public works project? You might think it's the Wall of China or something. It's not. It's the U.S. interstate transportation system. And that transportation system kills agriculture. Because what happened, and I witnessed this, I saw it as a young boy. My grandparents made a little bit of money selling berries and vegetables, and they would sell vegetables to local canneries, where they canned food. And as soon as they built that interstate through the middle of the state, it was the death of all the small farms. Why? Because now you could bring these vegetables from California. So they had no control over the price of the vegetables. These were decisions made by goons on Wall Street clicking champagne glasses together and using your tax dollars. Of course, you weren't here then, but they were, to ruin local farming. So the whole family had to move. So just as you're here in America, and many of you can trace your roots back to village India, I can trace my roots back to village Michigan, where I was uprooted and culturally devastated to have to move to, the whole family had to move to Detroit and work in the factories again. Next slide. So this is, New Vrindavan has developed its pilgrimage. This is go back one, please. These are visitors to New Vrindavan, pilgrims, and this particular family are from Haryana, and they're farmers. Next, please. Next slide is the students who come every year from the Bhakti Center, right around the corner from Prabhupada's first temple in America, 26 2nd Avenue. Now there's a wonderful temple there called the Bhakti Center, and these are the devotees who come. They bring students to New Vrindavan. Next, please. These are students from Ohio University. They're called the Global Learning Society, something like that. And they come every year, and I give them a tour and a talk and discuss these things. Next. Now, it's one thing to give a talk and make big talk about organic and all that, but you have to show an example. You have to really do it, because in America there is no Shastra, Guru, and Sadhu, practically. The sadhus in America are the politicians, and some of them actually had some good ideas. Like, I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard of Ben Franklin? He was like one of the founding fathers. Ben Franklin said, a country becomes rich, wealthy, by one of three means. Number one, plunder. What is our oil doing under their sand? In other words, you make up some excuse to invade, whether it's Vietnam, Iraq, whatever it is. We know what this is. You would have to be foolish to not understand what's going on in the world is resource wars, whether it's Syria, Iraq, this place, that place. It's all about resources, because they want to desperately maintain this consumer society based on fossil fuel, right? So they plunder. So a country becomes wealthy by plunder. And in this town you have Boeing. What's Boeing doing besides making airplanes? It's making the armaments of war. Next. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't go next. The second way that Ben Franklin said a country becomes wealthy is by commerce, which is basically extraction industry. Now, you go into the environment, you dig out the coal, you dig out the oil, you extract, you make business out of this. And it's kind of cheating, because you never really give back everything that you took. For you, I make no profit, we say in business, right? And the third way, he said, is that you plant a seed. And from that seed comes a plant that produces many seeds. And that we call Lord Krishna's Achinta Shakti. You plant one wheat seed, wheat berry, you put it in the ground. When a wheat plant grows, it has 40 to 50 on it. That's inconceivable. but that's the actual wealth. In Vedic understanding, wealth is measured biologically as the gifts of God. So there's some idea there, even in the founding of the country, that this is the proper understanding. Go ahead, next. So the way that we try to demonstrate that in New Vrindavan is through growing and then sharing what we grow. This is a field called the Garden of Seven Gates. It's a 6.5 acre field protected from deer invasion by an 8-foot fence. Go ahead, next. And then we've developed, as a result of developing that in a nice, manageable way, that we can feel good about giving a tour of that area, we've developed wonderful relationships with the local colleges. This is the big local land grant college, West Virginia University. I sit on a board there called the Growers Advisory Council. Now, they invite farmers in to give them advice about how to direct the farming in the state. Go ahead, next. This is a research scientist. You can see her, this large lady who's sitting down. Her name is Dr. Liedl. She's a scientist. And because we've managed our farming nicely, she gives us a grant every year to do replicated trials. Next. This is one of her students who's, these are the kind of trials we do. We measure the yield and the size and all these kind of things to create data for them so they can make decisions about seed types. Go ahead. So we're in a partnership with the local academia and around the country. These are a sign showing who we partner with, these various universities. Go ahead. This is a brochure that I put up around colleges because we have a very active apprentice program. This year I had 11 students come to New Vrindavan. They spend sometimes only 2 weeks, sometimes 2 months. But they learn how to do a backyard garden. They learn how to do a market garden. In other words, if you want to do more than just self-provision, grow enough to sell or for storage. And they learn how to do mini farming on 5 acres. And they learn about the value of the cows. So we don't directly advertise this as being, come to the Hare Krishna farm. It's called Small Farm Training Center. But by association, by taking prasad and by coming into the ambience of the greater community, they love it. And there's New Vrindavan from May until September has a wonderful festive environment. There's always, every 2 weeks, there's some major event going on where there's prasad and music and so many wonderful things going on. Go ahead, next. These are some of the apprentices. There's one boy's local, one's from the UK, and another one's from southern West Virginia. I'm teaching them here the old-fashioned system of how to harvest oats and wheat using what's called in English a scythe. You see, I know how in India they do this, but they squat, right? I see, they're going like this, like that. Well, somehow, for some reason in the West, they do it this way, but at least they used to do it this way. Go ahead, next slide. This was my crew last year. These are students who stayed for 3 months. One is a high school teacher, and the others are, the other girl's an architect on the far right side, and the other two were just traveling, but they were wonderful. They stayed for 3 months, and one of these girls became a devotee. She's now chanting Hare Krishna, married, living in New Vrindavan. Next. This is another apprentice. He was a U.S. Marine sergeant. One day, he wandered into New Vrindavan. He walked there, actually, many, many miles. And I said, I could see he wasn't ready to live in the ashram. So I said, why don't you come stay with me? I have some residencies where I can put people who are not ready to live in an ashram. And now he's a tour guide at the palace. And he's chanting, and he's become a very nice devotee. Go ahead. These are some other apprentices. As we expanded our apprentice program to augment the farming, We needed space. Next slide. This is where I used to give talks and discussions. It would hold 15 people. I have a map there of New Vrindavan. I show where Prabhupada first came, where our pastures are, where we keep the cows, like that. I give them an overview of the whole thing. But so many people are coming, we outgrew it. So that necessitated, go ahead, building a pavilion that we call the workshop pavilion. That's in the far kind of right-hand corner. It's a long shot. That's the teaching garden. And then the far right corner is the pavilion. Go ahead. And that's what we do there. We give talks. We can hold as many as 40 people at a time. Not just talks, but we do workshops. Last year we did 17 workshops there. And these are all, topics about how to grow this, how to grow that, and, techniques, methods, materials. But they get prasad. They see the garden. They see the cows. Often they go in and they see the deities. And they go to the palace, and they see Prabhupada in his palace. So it's a wonderful opportunity. Next. Another feature of this is the giving away of surplus produce where it's desperately needed in a city like Wheeling, West Virginia. So this is my pickup truck. I load it up every Tuesday, every Thursday, and I go into Wheeling to the soup kitchens of Wheeling and the food pantries. Wheeling is a beat-up, dirty, industrial town that it had 70,000 people 10 years ago and now has 20,000 people. The only thing that Wheeling exports is young people who are fleeing because there's nothing to do, and old people who are dying. They go out in caskets. That's Wheeling, West Virginia. So there's a lot of very poor people there. We're just struggling along. It's all basically what they call Section 8 housing. You know what that is? Section 8 housing is government housing, where the government supplements the rent. So the landlords don't care. They just let everything get run down. And it's a wreck. It's a train wreck. So there's many, many soup kitchens and food pantry. A food pantry is usually a church that begs donations of canned goods, dented cans, or whatever they can find. And once a week people come and they give them a box of food. So here we come with this organic food, organic, fresh, locally grown food. And they love it. Go ahead, next slide. This is some of the places we do that at. This is the Catholic Neighborhood Center. Next slide. That's the, go back. That's the Greater Wheeling Soup Kitchen. They feed about 400 people a day, twice a day. So now when these people come to get their box of cans and various types of food, there's fresh spinach, or there's fresh lettuce, or there's chard, or, bhaji. There's greens. So we're slowly introducing a healthier cuisine that they can gradually embrace and become healthier. West Virginia has the highest incidence of diabetes and obesity in America. 60% of the adult population of West Virginia is morbidly obese. Do you know the difference between obese and morbidly obese? Any doctors here? Obese means overweight. Morbidly obese means 100 pounds beyond that. So 60% of the adults in West Virginia are morbidly obese because they're eating junk. And so we're trying to change that by introducing something for free. We're not charging anybody for this. And we've done that consecutively now for 8 years. Next slide, please. The city is so devastated by economic deprivation that there are 750 vacant lots in the city of Wheeling. Again, small city, small population. 750 abandoned lots. The city comes in, they tear the house down, they take it to the landfill, and then they fill in the basement with garbage, and they put 4 inches of topsoil over it. So to the untrained eye, it looks like, oh, look, flat and soil. But when you dig in it, it's nothing but glass and bricks. You can't do much with it. So what we do is we bring in, I write grants, and then some of the private foundations in Wheeling bring or give us the wood and the soil we need to build raised beds, 12 inches above the ground. Next slide. This is one such garden called the Island Rats Community Garden. Next slide. That's the grand opening. Notice the school in the background. That's called Madison School. There's 600 students there who go up to about 8th grade. Every day they see this garden. And now we've arranged that they have 3 beds in that garden. So they're getting some guidance on how to grow their own food. Next. This is a garden that we put in at a college, the largest community college in West Virginia. It's called West Virginia Northern Community College. I put that garden in. It's 24 by 20. The main thing they teach at that college is culinary arts and business. So here's another example of how by giving to others, Krishna reciprocates. They asked me to come to a harvest festival. This is just this opportunity for local farmers to put their vegetables and fruits on a table. And there's some music being played, and the culinary art students come, and other people in Wheeling come to this. So I did, and I had my fruits, or I had my vegetables out, and an elderly lady came up, and she picked out some vegetables. I weighed them, and she asked me, how much? And I said, well, I don't know, $6, $7, it's fine. And she said, that's absolutely ridiculous. This organic, beautiful organic produce would cost $20 in the city of Pittsburgh. This was where she was from, Pittsburgh. And I said, I know, but what we want to do is make organic, fresh, healthy food affordable and available to people. And we prefer developing friendships and relationships than making a lot of money. So she started crying. She was so moved by that, she actually started crying, right? And then she said, let me introduce you to my husband. Next slide, please. This is that same college. So her husband came over, and we began talking and discussing things. As I found out, he was a vegetarian, strict vegetarian. And we were talking for 2 minutes, and the wife comes back, and she goes, oh, by the way, he's the president of the university. And I was like, wow, that worked out pretty well. So he had a very good impression of what we were doing, again, by Krishna's grace. And subsequently, I was invited to speak to classes there of religion classes and sociology classes, history classes. And they began sending culinary art students to New Vrindavan. So they get to see what we cook. I gave them a talk about what it means to be a responsible cook, all that. Next slide, please. So it's an indicator of how, by giving, Krishna reciprocates. This is the crew at the college. They introduced me to some private foundation people who are focusing now on sustainability, especially in these poor areas. I met with the project officers. Next slide, please. And last year I wrote $88,000 in grants just by taking them on a tour of all of our new gardens in that city, and then sitting, next slide, that's the public relations from it. Ooh, other way. That's another garden that we put in, next slide. And I stood in front of a dry erase board in front of what they call the project officer for the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation. This is an organization that gives away $9 million a year in West Virginia. And this lady came in, and she had $5,000 worth of clothes on, and I looked like my usual self, covered with manure, mud, and a T-shirt. And I said to her, we have all these gardens, and we're going to do this. If you'd like to help us, wonderful. We could use your help. And I think she appreciated the honesty of it, that we were not depending on them, that we were going to do this because it was the right thing to do for Lord Krishna, and it was the right thing to do for the people in need in that city. So she gave us, I wrote a grant called Bringing Our Food Dollar Back Home, and she gave us $55,000 to do research on that and put more gardens in as well. Next, please. So these are some of the gardens. These are some of the people involved with it in this city called Wheeling. That's on 14th Street. Next one. This is an interesting garden, the next one. That's the Department of Agriculture underneath a complete area that's a no man's land. This is underneath this overpass in an abandoned part of the city. And we put this gorgeous garden in there. It's a half acre now. And one boy, next slide, please. One boy was able to grow and sell $10,000 worth of produce out of that one garden. This is a garden on Wheeling Island that is run by all women. It's called the Mitch Collective. Go ahead. We taught them we put the garden in for them. Now they're doing wonderfully with it. These are some elderly people in Wheeling, and we built raised beds for them. Next. Then we began, okay, now here's another concept. Here's another working model that's really working. These are workshops we do. Last year we did 17 of these around the city. This is one called, can't quite read it from here. The basics of square foot gardening, raised beds, like that. And next slide. And 42 people came. Many of them who had never been to New Vrindavan previously came. 42 people came. Wonderful event. We did 17 of those in the last 2 years now. Next. This is under that overpass, one of the people I work with in Wheeling. He's becoming a devotee named Danny Swan. Next. Go ahead. Now here's the latest feature that we've done with this. Public school playgrounds. Now, you're in a very progressive state. I looked at the farm guide, local farm guide for Seattle or surrounding counties. In King County alone, there are 26 farmer markets. There aren't 26 farmer markets in the whole state of West Virginia. So you're in a very progressive place. So this kind of thing, putting gardens on elementary school playgrounds is very big news in that city. So this is some of the public relations. And this is Bhakta Robert, who chants 16 rounds a day and very helpful. Go ahead. Then we do outreach as well. This is a workshop I do entitled Welcome to Mama Frankenstein's Kitchen. And what that's about is I explain to people how the potato, especially potato, tomato, these things that we're so used to eating and thinking nothing of, are the most contaminated foods you can imagine in terms of pesticide residue, herbicide, pesticide, chemical fertilizer like that. I give a whole workshop on that. Go ahead. This is another school, largest playground in Moundsville, largest elementary school called McNinch Primary, 300 kids. We put in 10 raised beds there. Go ahead. And this is the kind of wonderful public relations it does for New Vrindavan. People really appreciate devotees because the flagship for all this is New Vrindavan community. We're the ones who are providing the free produce and the skill sets in the workshops. Go ahead. This is the King's Daughters Child Care Center. Next. This is all preschoolers. That's the PR that came from it. Next. Those are the kids. That's the garden in their backyard. Next. Go ahead. Keep going, please. These are just shot. Okay, now we're getting to the end here. This is the latest thing that we're doing. We're going into public housing and urban development projects that are total food deserts. There is nothing to eat around these places except fast food. And the sad reality is that the people who live in these places on incomes of under $10,000 a year supplemented by the government with food stamps, or their rent is supplemented, are obese, they're junk food addicted, and they're junk food malnourished. This particular place is called the Benwood McMecken Housing Authority. There's 191 units there, separate units. 174 of 191 of those units are single mom units. Do you know what that means? It means those kids are eating nothing but junk. Because the mothers don't even know how to cook. Why? Because their mothers didn't know how to cook. So all they eat is sugar, candy, sugar, powdered donuts, hamburgers, just the worst. Even the public schools in that area feed them that kind of junk. Next slide. So the answer to that is these small-scale local food projects. We want to spread this all over. It is going on all over, but we want to give a Krishna Conscious approach to it as well. These are my apprentices putting up a greenhouse. Next one. And that's a cooking, or that's a composting class I'm giving. Next slide. And there they are. That's the children, some of the children of New Vrindavan. They are the future farmers of America, the real future farmers of America. Next. And that has opened up a whole world of how to help people become God conscious through farming, gardening, environmental outreach, and learning to speak the language of shared spiritual values. Next. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. But I want to leave some time for questions here. But what's important about this is, okay, I'm just some person who comes to Seattle and I show you what I'm doing in West Virginia, which may as well be another planet, you know, so far away, right? It's a long walk. What's important here is that you who attend this temple, you who come here and patronize this temple, who help support it, need to expand what you're doing beyond just the confines of this building, because you are carrying with you a legacy of real sustainable civilization. You should be so proud of the fact that you took your birth in an Indian body type. Why? Because it means that in a previous life, you made some very good decisions. You made spiritual advancement, and now you're being rewarded for that because you have a spontaneous attraction for Krishna and for spiritual topics. But it carries with it a very deep responsibility, and that is not only to spread the message of Krishna consciousness, but to make that message available through the medium of farming, gardening, and outreach around those issues. And here's why. When we read Srimad Bhagavatam and we read about the glory of the Vedic era, right? King Yudhisthira, all these wonderful Vedic kings, and the whole glory of India, the hidden glory of India. The backdrop for all of that was a flourishing agrarian economy. That's what the backdrop was. Because wealth was measured biologically. It wasn't measured in bank balances, debit cards or credit cards, and all this sort of fiat money. It was actually measured biologically. So in order to make everybody happy, everybody Krishna conscious, we're going to return to that, because the present system will not last. Even though it may look like it's working right now, it won't last. And we know that. How do we know that? We know it from hearing from Srila Prabhupada. He told us that people will flock to these farms, these farm communities, because the cities will become so oppressive, the taxation will become so oppressive, the political machinery will become so oppressive, people will not want to stay in the cities anymore. So even though by comparison to where I live in rural West Virginia, Wheeling, West Virginia, which looks like hell, you're living on a heavenly planet here. Everything's new, everything's modern. Everybody has some money. Everybody's employed. But don't think that'll last forever. And I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm just saying we have a responsibility as devotees of Krishna to take that opportunity that we have and the blessings that we have and use it also to develop farm communities as well. That's really my message. And you'll see that this temple, including the new temple in Bellevue, when we start doing that, you'll see many Western people coming here too. Because the fact is this, nobody can present sustainability the way it can be presented from the Indian tradition. And that's why India is the oldest continuously existing civilization on earth. Because part of sustainability is reincarnation, understanding the transmigration of the soul. Part of sustainability is karma, taking responsibility for your food supply. Where does it actually come from? When we make an offering to the deities, where's that food? What's the point of origin of that food? Where it should come from is our own hands, our own loving hands. And that's why it's so important to develop this. Because Krishna, patram pushpam palam toyam yomad bhaktya prayachari taraham bhakti upariyam ashname prayatmanaha. If one offers to me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, I'll accept it. The key word in that is if. So how does the if fit into that? If means if from a point of origin that's acceptable to Krishna. Not just any old thing at the marketplace that's grown with who knows what, how it's handled, how it's chemically toxic, all that. So part of our responsibility in developing sustainability begins with what we're offering the deities, the quality, the purity of what we're offering Radha and Krishna. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to entertain those. Yes?
I was actually in West Virginia like 3 weeks ago.
Ah.
And I looked at the cows and the cow sheds and all that. So, like in the modern context, the cows are generally protected for some time for the milk. But we have tractors and other mechanical devices for farming and so forth. So, in the current context, what can we do with the bulls? Generally they are useless because we don't get enough people to, do cultivation using bulls and so forth.
Right.
So,
all right, so here's what you can do. What you can do is you can consolidate your purchasing power. How many of you here have businesses, you're running your own business? Okay, doesn't matter. My point is this. Stop seeing the milk problem as your problem. Start seeing it as our problem. And what we should do is find a qualified farmer on the metro fringe of Seattle and hire him to not only to milk for us his cows or cows that we give him, but to protect those cows as well and make a contract. In other words, what happens, when you live in a village, the way this is solved is that everybody has a common interest to see that the cows are cared for, the bullock are active, and that everybody's getting milk. When we come to the West, we think, well, this is just my problem now. Well, we shouldn't see it like that. We should see that by combining our purchasing power and organizing ourselves around getting milk that's not from a contaminated source where the cows are being slaughtered. Even the organic milk that you buy, Horizon, Dean, all these names, those cows are slaughtered. And yes, it's organic in the sense that it is, they're not giving them bovine growth hormone, which is this horrible injection every 2 weeks they give them to give huge amounts of milk, way beyond their biological capacity. They're not giving them antibiotics, but they're not letting them out. They're not pasturing. The way they cheat, and they get around this regulation that you have to let your cows out in the pasture, is they open the gate, they let 5 of them out for half an hour, they bring them back in. Oh, yeah, we let the cows out. The other 10,000 cows are standing in manure this deep. That's what they're doing. So there's really 2 things we can do. One is, the first step, I would think, is to collectively pool our resources, hire somebody within the congregation here who's articulate and understands farming to go out in the metro fringe of Seattle and find a farmer. Believe me, there are people out here who would love to, who would be tickled to death to serve the needs of the congregation here for milk. We should do that. It's not so hard. I mean, if you run a business and you think of all the things you have to do to run a business and the coordination and the headaches you go through with the IRS and the government and regulations and all that, you can do it. We have the brain power just in this room to do it, what to speak of the greater congregation. So that's the first phase. Let's collectively see this as our problem, not just my individual family's problem. The second thing, let's get our own farm. That's the real solution. And let's develop a place where the cows are protected, their offspring are protected, the bullock are being used for simple operations like Ghani, making oils and all these things, just like you'd see in a village in India. It's a show place where we can bring people. If you look through this farm guide that I just looked through today, and you read the individual write-ups for each farm, local organic farm, just in King County, there's 26 of them. They all talk about humanely raised beef, humanely raised pork, humanely raised chickens. They're killing. How about if there was one farm where the principle of ahimsa is observed, so that it's a model for everybody else, that you can live wonderfully within the guidelines of God's law without killing. What a service to Srila Prabhupada. What a service to Radha Krishna to create such a place, to create such a farm community. So those are the 2, that's the answer to your question. One, first, let's pool our resources. Let's find somebody who can do it, at least for now, so that the milk that this congregation puts in their body and gives to their children is not from cows that are slaughtered. And 2, let's start our own farm. Any other questions? So thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm also going to speak tomorrow at, what time, 10:30?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. I'll be here at 10 o'clock, so if you'd like to come back and see more, I don't have any more slides, but we can discuss some other principles here that are helpful, I hope. Thank you for your kind attention. Hare Krishna.